Hi, my name is Carolina, and thank you for attending this virtual event organized by Word Up Community Bookshop. Word Up is a community bookshop and art space run by local residents, many of whom are volunteers. We started as a 1-month-long pop-up shop in 2011, then stuck around due to overwhelming community demand. And this past June, we actually celebrated a 10th anniversary. We can be found at 2113 Amsterdam Avenue at the corner of 165th Street in Washington Heights, New York City. We host events for all ages and sell used and new books in English and Spanish. So check us out at wordupbooks.com to shop and see other virtual and outdoor events that we're having. We are open Tuesdays through Fridays, 12 to 6 p.m. and Saturdays, 11 to 5 p.m. We also started a new pop-up called Recirculation, that Pay What You Can books. It's also in Washington Heights, so check that out. We're very excited because we have 3 amazing professionals in creative nonfiction here with us. Harrison Candelaria Fletcher is the author of Presentimientos, A Life in Dreams, Descanso for My Father, and his newest collection, Finding Querida, Cadencia, Essays from In Between, which is out in a couple of days. His work has appeared widely in literary journals and anthologies and have received such honors as the NEA Fellowship in Prose, an Autumn House Nonfiction Prize, and the Colorado Book Award, and the New Letters Literary Award. Tomás Q. Morín is the author of the collection of poems Machete and the memoir Let Me Count the Ways, as well as the poetry collection Patient Zero and A Larger Country. He's a co-editor with Mari L'Esperance on the anthology Coming Close, 40 essays on Philip Levine. And he was recently awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship, so congrats. And finally, Hasanthika Sirisena work has been anthologized in This Is the Place, in Everyday People, The Color of Life, and twice named a notable story by Best American Short Stories. Her short story collection, The Other One, won the Juniper Prize and was released in 2016 by the University of Massachusetts Press. Her essay collection, Dark Tourist, won the Gournay Prize and was released in December 2021. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. My name is Harrison Candelaria Fletcher, as she said. Thank you, Carolina. Thank you, Tomás and Hasanthika and everybody at Word Up Books. It is such an honor to read with 2 of my favorite people in the world and 2 of my favorite writers and celebrate their new voices, their work into the world. And thank you all for coming. So tonight I'm going to read a couple of short excerpts from Finding Cadencia, which is a book about finding one's place in culture, landscape, spirit, and ethnic identity. And it's told in persona, in the voice of a younger self who was nicknamed Coyote. And throughout the book, uses that name and reclaims the name and repurposes it. So I will go ahead and begin with the prologue. My mother, an artist and collector, spent a lifetime trying to rescue her New Mexican past. She kept her most cherished artifacts in a nickel-plated hope chest beneath our front window. Near the bottom, beneath a double-sided dowry mirror and a crown of thorns from the Penitente Brotherhood, she placed an Easter mask from the Yaqui tribe of southern Arizona. Part human and part deer with a cottonwood face fringed with horsehair, the relic was as strange and beautiful as the 400-year-old ceremony from which it came, an enactment of the Passion Play with native deities and biblical figures performing rituals from both traditions. Near the end of a weeks-long ceremony of pageantry and dance, the masks were burned in a plaza bonfire to celebrate the resurrection of Christ. I wasn't supposed to play with it, which meant, of course, that I did. And one summer evening, while my mother tended her roses de Castilla outside, I slipped on the rough-hewn face covering and stood before a broad living room mirror. I remember being terrified by the cobwebs brushing my cheeks and the suffocating smell of mothballs and mold. But it was the eyes that held me, my eyes. shining like opals beneath the twisted animal features, and bringing the spirit to life as if some hidden side of me had stepped out from the trove of memory. Standing before my reflection, it wasn't the Pascola face that scared me, but what I recognized beneath it. Wearing the mask, I saw myself. And next, I'm going to read a short persona essay. It's written in long sentences without punctuation to enact a kind of reaching. And this is from an essay called Coyote Cookbook. 1. Beans. Because they're cheap and they're good, and they always last longer than the government checks boiling slowly away in the Pyrex pot on the open flame, building pressurized steam to slow cook the garlic and bay leaves in oil, to a river brown broth soaking down to your roots to bloom from your bones to fill up your table at supper. 2. Tortillas. Which you love more than bread, but can never get right, with an ingredient missing from the salt shortening flour that sticks to your skin with a white you can't wash. So you form instead an imperfect ball rolled into the shape of a ghost ship from Iowa, where your father came from before he sighed through the curtains of a hospital room to fill your house with a silent moon on a cast iron comal while you wait with a plate the size of the hole in your stomach. 3. Enchiladas. Rolled up tight or laid out and layered, like your mother's whole family in the back of the Buick, on a bed of quilts as warm as onions and cheese, while they drive from Corrales to Los Angeles again, so your grandfather can paint enough wartime destroyers to fill the 9 mouths fast asleep through the desert, with road stripes stabbing like forks and knives to pull them apart before they're even done dreaming. 4. Hamburger meat and fried potatoes. Filling the whole pan like the family reunion in your grandfather's yard for the cottonwood snapshot of Uncle Mike and his Schlitz and Tony's Dean Martin sheen and Uncle Sam's pointed fingers and everybody mingling like salt and pepper made moist from the steam to stick together only to come undone like a mismatched salad of crispy and soft that still feeds you like nothing else can. 5. Chilindrón. Because you never eat turkey on Thanksgiving Day since your mother adopted stray ducks, geese, and owls and planted a branch of dried cedar in a tub of rocks from the river where your Christmas tree stood and said being different is good. And if you really want to know, she's more Basque than Latina and made of garlic and red peppers and ham and chicken and lemon and white wine and Spanish olives and Roma tomatoes, still retaining their flavor while simmering whole. And isn't that the whole point of sustenance anyway? 6. Smothered steak. Your deceased father's favorite, pounded soft with a mallet until the muscle breaks down and the fiber gives way and the gold metal flour is forced deep into the folds and served up with gravy and drowned Southern style, like a history you don't know and a family you can't name and a serving you can't swallow, no matter how hard you chew. 7. Oatmeal. Because your dogs will eat anything when that's all that there is. 8. Pozole. Steaming the kitchen windows in red, amber, and green through the Christmas Eve boil of pork harmony garlic, you see your own face staring in from outside like a ghost on the ditch on your way home from school with his hand raised hello like the dreams of your father who was born on this day and now waits all alone with photos in the closet to swallow the moths of memories that pass like the snow drifting down into paper bag candles filling with fragments of light. Last one, 9. Cinnamon bread. Because it wasn't as bad as it might seem, and sometimes you woke from your afternoon nap to find your mother in the kitchen dusted with flour and brown sugar sparkle, making from scratch a kneaded loaf with a yin-yang eye spiraling straight toward a center uniquely its own, to show what she said and what you try to believe, that yes, being mixed can be good. Thank you.
Harrison, that was an absolutely delicious reading. I already had dinner before this, but I could eat again. The research, if I'd been writing that book, the research, I would have gained 20 pounds just researching that book. Yeah, thank you for reading that, and it's such a joy to be reading with the both of you and to get to see you. I'm going to read a vignette from the new book, the memoir, Let Me Count the Ways. The title is Symmetry. Comfy socks, phone near where I'll sit, a glass of water. My apartment is still. When I choose one of the 25 books I'm currently reading, I think, what a weirdo. And then, yes, but a weirdo who is also the counter of lines, the marker of beginnings and endings, an oldest son and a middle child, whose nose is allergic to the air and the trees in all seasons, the devourer of apples and the hater of peaches, a bastard who is given 3 chances at a father, the enemy of tomatoes and raw fish and milk, the stomach grumbling behind you, the patron of cats, both feral and not, the disciple of the tigress that suckles the orphaned piglet. A few slight adjustments in the parallel lines that my books, shoes, phone, couch, and pillows send out and away from themselves are in harmony with the lines of the windows, counter, walls, floor, and doors. I am a spider in the center of a perfect web. I am hungry, always hungry, but I do not know for what. I put my feet on the ottoman and open Kafka's The Blue Octavo notebooks. My cat stretches her black arm with the white glove on the end of it across my stomach. Her other arm also looks like it has a white glove. Her name is Lindsay, and she is black with white, and it looks like she's wearing orange shorts with high white socks. Cat books call her a tortoiseshell, although just like other cats that look like her, she does not resemble a tortoise, or a turtle for that matter. Like a tortoise, she is feisty and will snap at you if you place your hand in front of her face, though I suppose anything would. For 2 years, starting in 1917, instead of writing in his usual diaries, Kafka took to writing in octavo-sized notebooks. He filled 8 of these smaller notebooks with parts of stories, as well as his thoughts on the hope and suffering we encounter between our birth and death. Until I jump to another book, my mind is at rest. No counting, just drinking the words someone poured onto a page. I am tired, so tired. The pages of the book are dark because the book is in my right hand and its cover faces away from the dark kitchen toward the window. When I grow tired and switch hands, the sunlight from the window makes the words sharper. Lindsay looks at me and blinks slowly. I've read that when one cat does this to another, it means, I love you. What can it mean for me? And if a blink of an eye can mean a whole sentence, what have I been saying to the world all my life? It would be years before Lindsay learned to accept love as easily as she gave it. I'm not even afraid to pet her when she sleeps beside me anymore, even though she is nearly invisible in the dark. Her previous owner said Lindsay had had 2 kittens when she was young. One was given away and the other was kept. Her son, named Tiger, and Oscar, another cat they lived with, bullied her at mealtime, even after she had enough and left. Oscar came around to fight with her. He didn't know she had a family now, that she was no longer just a cat named after the street she lived on, but Lindsay Ann Lou Sticktail Morín. She hovers near my desk while I type this. I check the clock. It's 4:23 p.m. She likes to eat dinner at 4:30 p.m. Like me, she dislikes daylight savings because it throws our routines off. I ask her to wait, and I keep typing. She climbs the stairs to the couch and heads toward my desk. I click Save As. I grab her wet food from the refrigerator. 4 seconds in the microwave and stir. Arthritis doesn't keep her from trotting after me. I tap the white ceramic bowl that has always been her dinner bell. I'm positive she's been deaf for over a year, yet I can't help but ring it, just in case. She gobbles her food as if it is the last time she will ever eat. Once she is finished, I wipe her runny nose, rinse the bowl, and return here. She is purring because she was hungry, and now she is not. This year, she turned 19. I met her when she was 3 or 4 and walked up to me in a parking lot. While she was rubbing my legs, I stroked her back. She wheeled and tried to scratch me. Surprised, I watched her run off. We repeated this scene the next few months before she tried moving into our apartment. Since she and our cat didn't get along, we tried everything to keep her out. We shook plastic bags to scare her and even sprayed her with water. Nothing worked. A few months later, when she scratched her owner for trying to carry her home, we knew then she had chosen us, had marked the moment in blood, and was ours. Though the sun is low, what little is left of it still makes it easier to see now the shapes of the letters Kafka strung together to write. One can disintegrate the world by means of very strong light. For weak eyes, the world becomes solid. For still weaker eyes, it seems to develop fists. For eyes weaker still, it becomes shamefaced and smashes anyone who dares to gaze upon it. The world demands to be seen, gets angry when it isn't. When the moon is out tonight, it won't matter which hand I hold my book in. The darkness of my kitchen will be the same as the darkness outside. The only difference will be that I know where all the sharp objects sleep in one. As for the other, who can say? Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. Tomás, one of the things I really think about a lot when I hear your work or read it is how much your work, first of all, how erudite your work is, weaving in the Kafka and also the life of the cat, but how it's a work of survival. I think about that with you and Harrison as well, just of the beauty of that. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that. I just want to say thank you to everybody who's here this evening. And thank you to Carolina and Veronica for making this happen. Word Up, this is my second time reading here, but Word Up is so important to the community. It's such an important presence. It really does what I think really great bookstores do, is hold us all up. And I wanted to just acknowledge that. Thank you. I am going to share my screen, and I'm going to share the essay that I am reading from. And the reason for that is sort of to, assist with accessibility. You can also just listen, you don't have to read off the screen if that isn't comfortable for you. I will say that this is not the version that appears. It does appear in the book, but it's the same essay, but this is not a scanned version of the book. The essay is called Broken Arrow. And I'm just going to start right away. 1961. On January 22nd, along the coast of North Carolina, the 8-man crew of a B-52 realizes their plane is losing fuel too fast. The right wing might be damaged, but there's no way for them to check. Only 2 members of the crew can see outside, and all that is visible to either of them is the night sky and the ocean, a purple-red bruise intersecting at the horizon. The pilot, Major Tulloch, radios Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in Goldsboro that the plane must make an emergency landing. This wouldn't be particularly notable, except that the Keep 19 mission is part of the Strategic Air Command and is on a test run for a program meant to allow the United States to be the first to attack in case of a nuclear war. The plane carries 2 Mark 39 thermonuclear weapons, in other words, 2 hydrogen bombs. But both of these bombs together have an explosive yield 500 times greater than the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima, and a kill range of somewhere between 7 and 8.5 miles. Each is active, ready to detonate upon being dropped. The January night is cold, and because of a front moving through, the air at that altitude is estimated at 150 knots. At Category 1 hurricane winds of 62 to 82 knots. During the second midair refueling, the turbulence is so strong, Tulip struggles to keep the plane steady. He feels every buffet and pitch in his muscles and his bones. The cockpit of the bomber is not a comfortable place. It's all metal and glass and smells of sweat, burned rubber, and urine. The crew has been on alert not just for the 10-hour flying time, but also before that on the ground as they wait hours to receive their commands. They are, by now, simultaneously tired and wired, fueled by adrenaline and raw desire to complete the mission. At some point during the refueling, the pilot reportedly asks a co-pilot to hand fly the plane so he can rest a moment. It takes at least 3 tries to finish what should be a simple process. Flying a plane takes strength, coordination, and mental stamina under any circumstances. B-52 Stratofortresses are massive planes, 200 tons of metal, a wingspan of over 180 feet, 8 engines. In the sky, these are the hulking monsters of war movies, casting long shadows that slide menacingly across fields and mountains. On the runway, the bulk slows the bomber down and causes it to waddle as it accelerates, a motion that the ground crews dub the elephant walk. The standard instrument panel consists of 8 throttles and 32 gauges for monitoring the engines. But I'm not being fair when I reconstruct this plane using only bolts and metal plates, tonnage and turbo power. The B-52 is surprisingly sensitive with a delicately balanced central nervous system dedicated ultimately to maintaining life. I am always shocked when I read about plane crashes, as I like to do, to realize that planes aren't built to beat nature. Nothing man-made can at an altitude of 40,000 feet, but to defy it like an extended, especially precarious game of tiddlywinks. Major Tulip is a career soldier with thick beefy features of an extra in a World War II reenactment. He enlisted after Pearl Harbor at the age of 29 and has served ever since, first as a soldier and later as a fighter pilot and a test pilot. He has hundreds of hours of combat experience and has walked away from 3 test plane crashes. He is, by military standards, an old man at 46, at least a decade and a half older than most of the crew. But he is the sort of man SAC wants flying these missions, seasoned, tough, capable. He is not afraid when the crew reports that they have lost 19 tons of fuel in little under 2 minutes. He does not imagine, as I do, some dumb dinosaur-like beast suspended high above, beyond our ken, bleeding out, slowly dying. He does not feel that frisson of excitement, the metallic taste on the tongue, at the thought of some great catastrophe. He is too professional to indulge imagination. He listens instead as the Adol 57, the fuel tanker, informs him that they have spotted a leak at the base of the right wing. He knows he and his crew are in some danger, though he does not know how much. He also understands that with that much fuel, with that much weight, they cannot land or the plane will break apart. They must stay aloft. He does as he is commanded. He moves the plane several hundred miles off the coast of Wilmington to prevent, if they do have to crash land, possible nuclear destruction. 1975. A few months into his first job in America, at Cherry Hospital in Goldsboro, North Carolina, my father is assigned Frank Washington, a paranoid schizophrenic who everyone else in his unit is afraid of. According to my father, Frank grew up in Brooklyn and served time in New York State for assaulting a man. When the state released Frank from Sing Sing, the corrections officer gave him a bus ticket and told him to travel as far away as possible. Frank had made it to North Carolina before voices instructed him to stab a man in a bus terminal restroom. The day of his release from the North Carolina Correctional Facility, Frank refused to leave. The guards turned a high-pressure water hose on him to blast him from his cell, admitted him to Cherry Hospital because, as court-appointed lawyer put it, you had to be crazy not to want to leave jail. Frank is a small man, lithe but powerful. He's African-American, unlike many of the other patients at the Cherry Hospital who take little interest in their personal hygiene. He dresses in neatly kept, well-fitting clothes. The orderlies and nurses are afraid of Frank and refuse to get on an elevator alone with him, claiming he hides his shank somewhere on his body. Behind his back, they make fun of Frank's composure, call him queer. According to my father, no one else wants to take Frank on as a patient, and he doesn't really have a choice either. I wonder when my father tells me this, if he wasn't assigned Frank as some sort of punishment. My father, all his life, has elicited from others respect for his intelligence and confidence, and the desire to put him in his place. The latter he brings on himself. He is charming, but also quick-tempered, often rude and abrasive with little warning. During the patient interview, my father watches Frank closely. Frank is calm, almost listless, and he doesn't make eye contact. He is 38, making him and my father close to each other in age. But this man, before my father's alone, without any family, long ago lost to him, and very ill. He keeps his hands on the table in front of him where everyone can see them, another sign of life spent in institutions. My father asked Frank if he knows what the following proverb means: a watch pot never boils. Frank takes a long time to respond. When he finally does, he speaks to the corner of the room. He explains that if you watch a pot, the water won't boil. This isn't an indication of the man's intelligence, but a symptom instead of his disease. He prefers, perhaps can only comprehend the literal. His mind cannot contend with the deeper figurative meaning. My father notes the response on the patient's chart. When he looks back, he's distracted momentarily by some feeling of sorrow. He isn't supposed to be here, he thinks. He is here by accident. He's very well prepared and very ambitious. He left Sri Lanka in the early 70s to complete a prestigious fellowship in England. He was supposed to arrive in a new world, but this world, rendered barren by the cool October wind, looks anything but new. The fields with their hardened dark earth and desiccated corn stalks are used and uncompromising. Cherry Hospital feels worn and tired with its decades-old brick buildings. In movies, on television, American hospitals had looked bright, all white, with young, attractive nurses and doctors. Cherry Hospital reeks of ammonia and mildew. Frank complains of pain in his arm and shoulder. Last week, my father and Frank had a lively conversation about boxing. Both were boxers in their youth, and they bonded over their shared interest. But Frank isn't lively today. This might be the pain. It might be the Haldol. Frank begins to explain that the pain is caused by radio waves emitted by a transmitter at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. This is a man whose brain has splintered, a brain that doesn't properly process sensory information. It doesn't process social cues. Frank's victim at the bus terminal may have taunted him, or he may have smiled. I'm going to stop there. It goes on a little longer, but I think it's a good place to stop because it reconnects it to the first. Stop the share. And I have questions for Tomás and Harrison, but I would love to know if those of you listening have questions. I'd love to hear from you. If anyone out there would like to start off the questions. Otherwise, I'll ask my question. Well, as people are typing, and you can type your questions into the chat, and we'll get some. I wanted to ask both Tomás and Harrison about, fathers appear in your work, and the absence of fathers are very much part of your work. Do you want to talk about that how your work addresses that, or just run with that question any way that you feel? Or maybe if you feel like that's not the way you want to go, then of course just deal with that in any way that you can or want to.
Go ahead, Tomás.
Yeah, I mean the memoir is a it's sort of like a triptych. It's in one way it's a triple portrait, right, of my father, my surrogate father, and my grandfather, right, my three father figures, and the ways in which they impacted my my life. And yeah, it's hard to know what to say. I mean, I wrote about my father indirectly a couple of times in my poetry, but he's mostly absent, like he's present through his absence. And there's just something about when I first undertook the memoir, I wanted to try to find a way to, in a way, like fossilize my memories of them, and in a way fossilize them. Because there's this wonderfully smart thing that Annie Dillard, I think she wrote it in The Writing Life, or she might have said it in an interview, where she had a word of caution for folks writing nonfiction, and what in particular personal nonfiction. And what she remarked on was that when you take a memory from your life and you put it into language and put it on the page, that oftentimes it will fossilize and it will stop growing and changing with you as you get older, which makes sense. And I had reached a point in my life where I could feel some of my memories of these three men starting to change as I was entering middle life. And I suppose one of my motivations for writing the book was fear that whatever ways in which my memories of them would change, that it would change. They would change in such a way that I would miss something I wouldn't be able to get back. So writing the book, Let Me Count the Ways, was a way to try to crystallize them. To try to crystallize them and hold them for when, one day I, won't be able to remember and recall, some of these moments from when I was 12 or 7 or, even 22. So it was an attempt at recovery before loss, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Tomás. Wow. And mine's, it's still something I'm sorting through, to be honest with you. Little backstory, I never knew my dad. He died when I was 18 months old. And he had no family, no friends. There was basically nothing about him that was passed on to my family but a box of artifacts. And there was always this silence in my family. We didn't talk about him. I guess we didn't know how to talk about him. So my first book was Descanso for My Father, was kind of an attempt to not fill that space, but hold that space. As Tomás says, the absence is presence. He was pretty much everywhere, but no one ever mentioned it. And so it was a force in my life, and has been a force. But it's interesting you say about, memories fossilizing and trying to recover them before they're lost. It's almost the reverse for me. I never had any memories, so it's almost like trying to recreate or trying to touch something that you've never had. And so this latest book, I had no intention of, writing about my father, but it came up, when I'm thinking about, my ethnicity and my identity. I have his skin color. I have his name. I'm walking through the world, as a part of his family, which I never knew. So it's trying to to reconcile that in a different way. But writing about him is more of a way of invoking or touching a presence that I can't really articulate any other way. So it's like that presence is always fluid for me. I guess it doesn't, if that makes any sense, because I have one memory of him and little else. So how do I reconcile or negotiate that space is by trying to put myself in places that he was and experiences that he had, and touch him, through my imagination and through my work. So it's still something I'm negotiating, and probably will always be, just that heavy absence. But that's a good question. Thank you, Hasi.
Before I knock the tennis ball back on the other side of the net to Hasi, just want to, speaking of fathers and sons, say hi to my son who is watching and who's trying to talk to me through the Zoom. Hi, Mijo. Yeah, Hasi. So I know you've written about your parents, and one of the things that I admire about your work is the ways in which you seem to. I mean, to me, it seems like magic. I know it's not magic, right? It's a lot of hard work and technique and craft, but the seemingly magical way in which you're able to weave history and larger history with personal history, and the lives of folks, and so I was wondering if you could maybe knock some of that magic dust off, share with us, how do you do that? How do you do that?
Well, as you both know, I'm an autodidact. I'm always I'm the person in the middle of the movie that announces to everybody in the room that all the actors are actually British. And I give, I give the, what Academy Award they won, or, I'm just that annoying human being, right? And so I love to do research. And so maybe the truth is that my essays are just, I was talking to somebody, we were talking about how we're professors so that we could wake up at 10 a.m. in the morning. And so maybe I'm an essayist for some reason, so that so that I can show off all these like hours I spend just reading things from JSTOR. And a serious answer to your question, which I really love, thank you, is so there's an essay in my collection about my father's secret marriage. And so that, by the way, is my little push to get people to buy it. You can read about my father's secret marriage. But anyway, and in the course of, I'd actually started off sort of being really kind of angry about, as you can imagine, finding out that your father is secretly married. But then in the course of doing the essay, I started doing a lot of historical research to kind of keep it in line with some of the other work I was doing. And when I was doing the historical research, I realized the amount of, I realized that marriage is just a construction, that there's nothing, our idea of a love marriage today is really a product of a time and place, and you could argue with me, but I think capitalism. And so, and that our ideas of what marriages have been constantly reforming. And so I think that the research is also a way for me to actually understand my place in time, and to also humble myself. I think I started off sort of saying I use it to kind of, flaunt my knowledge, but I also think it's, for me, ultimately a sort of humbling act, because you realize that whatever pain you have or whatever story you have, it actually belongs to a larger. I mean, I thought when I started that essay, I thought I was the only person on the planet whose father had secretly married someone. Turns out to be more common than you would imagine. So, I think that's been so the magic of it is, I think, to just really dedicate yourself to the search, to put yourself onto a search. There's no magic. There's, I think, just sort of legwork and getting the information. And then also, maybe, some of my background's a fiction writer, which it also helped me to do the reconstructions, because I could then think about how can I make this not look like a textbook, but try to imagine it as having happened. But actually that leads me to a question, if you don't mind, that I would love to ask both of you, because
can I ask a follow-up real quick?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
I have a follow-up to his follow-up.
Yeah, the follow-up to the follow-up. Do you start with the personal story or the personal narrative that you want to write about, and then find, diving into research and history? Or is it the other way around, that, you come across, for example, that account, that you read about with the B-52, and then that sparks something that leads you to like a connection to a personal story?
I think it's almost always the personal that leads to because there's another essay in the collection called Lady. And what happened is that's about the illness that my mother died from, and the naming of it. I don't want to go too long, but I don't want to like hog all the time either. And so, so often, I think one of the biggest things that I know for anybody out there listening who's thinking about writing essays or writing nonfiction, I think the biggest thing is to go on a search, is to find a question, maybe to think of everything that you're doing as searching for something. And I definitely see that with your work, both of your work. So I know it's something that you want to both comment on, but something that I had wanted to ask you both is that, you know, Tomás, you have a Guggenheim for poetry, but you also just recently were awarded an NEA for prose. And so you're a poet who's been moving into prose, or should I, is that not, that's not exactly right. I think you've always been dealing in, you know, writing prose, but, you know, you know, and then Harrison, I've noticed that with your work, you're a prose writer who's been moving towards the lyric, it feels like. Do you want to talk about, do you feel like those distinctions are completely not useful? That's something also that maybe you want to say, you know, they're not particularly useful. So yeah.
Glad you asked that question, because Harrison, while you were giving that wonderful reading, I had a few moments where I was thinking, if I didn't know any better, I would think you were reading a poem. You know, like as someone in the audience, you know, it has that, you know, like incredible, like lyrical charge. And unless I was told different, that's probably what I would have assumed, you know.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah.
Even the essayists in the world would make the difference. No, thank you. No, I mean, I was interested in, to piggyback on your question, Tomás is also a translator, and I wonder how that affects both his prose and his poetry. But just for me, I mean, just to get to your question, I think it's just a part of the reaching, I think. You know, I think for me, that's what drives an essay is the reaching, is the attempt to do something. And it's that's just the direction the work is taking me, where, you know, I guess getting back to the father question, part of the reason why I write the way I do is because of the way I was raised. And to deal, you know, absence and negative space is something that I understand. I mean, that's just how my family talked. And so that kind of influences my work as much as any kind of genre boundaries. It's just the way of reaching, I think, is, I know that's maybe corny, but it's just, that's kind of what I'm trying to do, is to reach something I can't quite touch. And yeah.
I feel like genre distinctions are maybe are most helpful for people like Word Up who have to design a bookstore and have to figure out where to put things, right? And if part of the goal is from the moment someone steps in the door, how can you get them to the section they want to get to as fast as possible? Like that's really helpful. Like as a writer, I feel like it's less so. When I did my MFA, it was one of the MFA types of MFA programs where everything was very much siloed. There was no taking workshops outside of your genre. And I've never taken a workshop in nonfiction or fiction. But like Hassie, I'm an autodidact too. I was like, well, if I want to figure out how to write a memoir, I should read a lot of memoirs and books about writing memoirs, and then try and fail and then try again. It's funny. The first time I wrote anything that could be classified as nonfiction was back in 2012. New England Review was just starting NER Digital, and they had reached out to their contributors for content, and they were like, just something short, and I was like, an essay, like a short essay, like what is that? So I wrote this really small thing. It was probably like just a few paragraphs on Francis the Talking Mule in those movies, which I absolutely adored growing up, and then I still do. But after that, it sort of like, that was the one little thing that sort of like tipped me towards, thinking of like, maybe I can do this, and yeah, and it's just, following curiosity, same thing with the translations, never planned to be a translator, never planned to write nonfiction. I have a novel I'm going to try to start drafting this summer. Never planned, like, to write a novel. It's just like I go into all of these things not expecting that any of them will ever be published, only expecting that I'm going to have a lot of fun trying to figure out how to do something that I've never done before.
Tomás, put your wonderful essay in the New York Times into the chat. So
the cardboard one.
Yeah,
that was so much fun to write.
That was great. Well, Hasi, I had a question for you. Getting back to your work in the research, it's like, and for nonfiction, it's like you kind of inhabit history, and as a nonfiction writer and instructor, it's something we talk about. I mean, do you imagine your way? And I mean, how do you use speculation to make history live again?
I think because with creative nonfiction, I think one of the myths that, one of the things that, and maybe Harrison, you have this too, because you teach creative nonfiction at Colorado State, that more and more it becomes really hard to define creative nonfiction. It's like I feel like creative nonfiction, in that it is, a genre, is this genre that can really accommodate, it's capacious, it can really accommodate so much. And one of the great things is that I really have felt freed by CNF in ways that I wasn't with fiction. Or I didn't feel that way. Maybe it's just me as a fiction writer. But one of the things, I know that you have a background as a reporter, and I'm not going to claim that, but one of the things I've really enjoyed has been doing reporting for my, some level of reportage for my work. But what I think is really important with creative nonfiction is that what keeps it from being a feature article, or what keeps it from being a textbook version of history, is that you sort of apply the imagination to it and the speculation to it, and language, figurative language, just your style to it. So I think that's the liberty and the freedom of creative nonfiction. She's not here. My girlfriend's a classicist, and I kind of get nervous when she reads my stuff, because I'm afraid she's gonna go, wow, that is not rigorous. And it really isn't. I would never want anyone to think that, it can take the place of, the really hard work that so many historians do. But what I do think is what CNF can give us is a kind of a sense of history is always living in our imaginations.
I feel one of the ways in which Hasi, like in your writing, you really accomplish that is through the use of suspense. Like that essay that you read an excerpt from, like I've read the essay, I've heard you read parts of it before, and yet I was still, caught in the suspense of like, oh man, like what's coming next, even though I know it. And I think that's for sure one of the things that differentiates it, from what we might think of, or some people might disparagingly call, like a dry historical text. You're telling a story.
I felt really bad, Tomás, because you more than Harris, I think, have heard, that essay like 100 times now. I was like, Tomás will be going cursing me for reading that essay again. So thank you.
In the reprint just dedicated to us, you know. When
I know,
reprinting.
You know, and Tomás, your reading is beautiful. One thing I was struck as I heard you read it is just how seamless you transition from the inside outside game, or from the zoom in, zoom out, brought to the particular, then that was just really beautiful and hard as hell to do. You know, this is what we talk about all the time and you know, within class, and you just do that wonderfully well. Is that a movie picked up from poetry, or you know?
Well, you know, it's I mean, it's a move I've been doing in poetry for a long time. I mean, I write narrative poems that are lyrically charged, and I've been writing story poems, you know, from the beginning. So like all of those things that I learned in those techniques about how to write poems in that way have served me so well, you know, as a prose writer, as a nonfiction writer. It's just the canvas is bigger now, you know, instead of being like a miniaturist, you know, and telling these stories on these, you know, small 5x5 canvases. It's just, you know, bigger now. And that's taken some getting used to, you know, but yeah, you know, it's just, yeah, that was something I learned from poetry, and from the people that I learned from, and who were my teachers. Either I knew them or I didn't. So people like Philip Levine, the poet I, you know, she wrote dramatic monologues, you know, that helped a lot in terms of, you know, her work has for sure influenced how I develop character, you know, how to do it quickly, you know, how to really ground a character in very, very few words, and then build upon that. Yeah, so, you know, that sort of circles back to that conversation we're having earlier, that comment about, you know, these lines between the, you know, the genres. I mean, if we go back, you know, far enough, you know, before the printing press, right, before, you know, all of that, it was all poetry.
Yeah.
You know, it was all poetry.
Tomás, I hope you don't mind me saying, but as I was listening to your piece, I know that you love Kafka, and I'm waiting for your Kafka book. I thought Kafka would love your work, because I think so many of the qualities of Kafka come through, especially the ways that you're able to make language at once enigmatic, to tap the magic of it, the sort of the, you know, but also the clarity of your writing.
Can I use that as a blurb? Kafka would love this book.
Yes.
That's the only sentence I need. Kafka would love this book. Yeah. When I'm trying to think of, I think it was Max Brode's biography of Kafka, when I was reading it, and got to the part where he talked about how funny Kafka was, and how when he was reading a draft of the Metamorphoses to a bunch of pals, like in their living room, how he had to stop reading because he was Kafka was on the ground laughing and crying with tears, and how everyone just thought it was the most hilarious and absurd thing. And I remember thinking, I thought it was funny too, but I couldn't find anyone else who thought it was funny. Everyone else, you know, thought it was so dour and just morbid and sad, and it is sad too, you know. But it's also, yeah, I felt like I really connected, you know, with, and was really in step with that, you know, that sense of humor.
I think we're getting close to time. I don't know that anybody out there had any questions. I feel bad because I felt like we ended up talking to each other. We didn't check enough the chats. And
No, it's okay.
thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
I think we're at time anyway, so
Oh.
I just wanted to say thank you again to Word Up, and also thank you, Harrison. This has been wonderful. It is always a pleasure to see you both and to have the chance to be in conversation with you.
Yeah, thank you both. Thank you, Word Up, for having us. We could talk all night if it's not obvious, just the three of us. But yeah, thank you for letting us sharing some space with you.
Yeah, absolutely. It was wonderful. Thank you, Carolina and everybody at Word Up, and Tomás and Hasi, you guys are great. Let's continue the conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you again. This conversation was amazing, and I'm just excited to devour all your work. Word Up thanks you. Again, if you want to buy any of their books, you can do that at wordupbooks.com, where you can do pickup or shipping. And yeah, check us out, follow us on social media for any upcoming events. And yeah, thank you so much again. I hope everyone has a great night.
Thank you. Everyone have a good night.
Yeah, thank you all.